Welcome, traveler of time. Tonight we leave behind the noise of the present and step softly into the valley of Sparta, a land of mountains and silence, where discipline shaped every breath, and where life itself was bound to an unyielding code. Sparta is remembered for warriors and battles, for shields raised against impossible odds. Yet here in this journey, we will not chase the clash of armies. Instead, we will walk slowly into the quieter truths of daily life, the hunger, the rituals, the discipline, and the long hours that made legends possible. Before we begin, I invite you to share something simple with us. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Whether it is from a city of lights or a quiet countryside, by mountains, forests, or sea, your presence matters here. Leave a note in the comments and let us know where this story finds you. Now imagine yourself in the valley of the Eurotas River. The evening air is cooling, carrying the scent of olive groves and the steady murmur of water. Around you are homes of stone and clay, simple and plain. There are no grand decorations here, no luxury to boast only the essentials, for Spartans believed strength came not from wealth, but from restraint. Children run barefoot along dusty paths, their laughter sharp yet brief, for even their games are meant to harden them. Elders watch in silence, and all things seem to move not for the individual, but for the city itself. This is where our journey begins, a place of endurance, of unity, of lives lived under the Spartan code. Let us now step quietly into their world. Part 1. Childhood in the Agoj. The journey into the daily life of a Spartan warrior begins not with the clash of shields, nor with the hardened veteran standing proudly in the phalanx, but in the small footsteps of a boy. To understand the warrior, one must first walk with the child, for Sparta's warriors were shaped from the earliest years of life. Their training, their hunger, their very thoughts were molded by a system unlike any other in the ancient world. It was called the Agoj, the path, the upbringing, the school of discipline that began in childhood and ended only with death. Picture the city of Sparta at dawn. The sky above the Taygetus mountains is still pale. The sun not yet breaking over the peaks, but the settlement is already stirring. A mother holds her newborn tightly, her eyes uncertain, because she knows that the fate of her child will not rest in her hands. In Sparta, even life itself belonged to the state. Newborns were inspected by elders of the tribe, their small limbs and fragile frames examined to see if they were strong, straight, and promising. Those judged weak or unfit were left at the edge of the wilds, exposed to the elements. It is a cruel image, one that even in its own time set Sparta apart. But to the Spartans, it was necessity. Only the strong were meant to survive, for the city demanded nothing less. For those who lived, childhood did not mean comfort. A boy grew under the watchful eye of both his family and the community. For in Sparta, every child belonged not to their parents, but to the polis, the city-state. At the age of 7, the boy would be taken from his mother's side, his small bundle of belongings gathered, his eyes wide with fear and curiosity. He would leave his home not to return, except on rare occasions, until he was grown into a man. This was the beginning of the Agoj. The Agoj was not a school in the way we imagine today. There were no desks, no scrolls of knowledge passed around, no quiet classrooms. It was a system of discipline, survival, and endurance. The lessons were written on the body in hunger, in bruises, in scars. The boys were grouped into units, living together in simple barracks, sleeping side by side on beds they themselves made of reeds and rushes pulled from the riverbanks. They were given only one cloak for the entire year, winter and summer alike, to harden them against cold and heat. Their meals were meager, intentionally so, forcing them to survive on little and teaching them the art of endurance. Food was plain and scarce, most famously the black broth, a soup of pork, vinegar, and blood. So unappealing that other Greeks mocked it. Yet to the Spartans, it was strength in a bowl. Hunger was constant. But hunger too was part of the education. Boys were encouraged to steal food to survive, slipping through shadows, raiding fields, and taking what they could. But if caught, The punishment was harsh not for stealing, but for being careless enough to be caught. The lesson was clear. A Spartan must be cunning, resourceful, and discreet. Discipline was everywhere. The boys were beaten regularly, sometimes without cause, simply to harden them against pain. Endurance was a virtue, complaint a weakness. They learned to march barefoot across rough ground, to go without comfort, to sleep with little covering, to endure the sting of the lash without tears. This was not cruelty for its own sake. It was the Spartan belief that only through hardship could a warrior be born. And yet the Agoj was not only about physical strength, it was also about loyalty, unity, and the binding of every boy to the city and to one another. They learned to sing in chorus, their voices rising together in hymns and battle songs, the rhythm of music binding them into one body. They learned stories of Sparta's past, tales of heroes and kings, of Thermopylae, long before it became legend, of ancestors who gave their lives for the city. They learned to speak briefly, directly, with sharpness and wit. From this came the famous laconic speech, words short and cutting like the edge of a spear. To speak too much was wasteful. To speak with precision was strength. Among the boys, friendships were formed, rivalries sharpened. Older youths served as role models, mentors, sometimes even protectors. Bonds between the young and their elders were carefully cultivated, for they believed love and loyalty would strengthen unity in battle. A Spartan boy was never truly alone. He was always part of a group, always being watched, always being tested. The city itself was the parent, and the Agoj was its hand. But let us walk closer into the life of a single child. Imagine a boy of 8 or 9, small for his years, his cloak ragged from use, his stomach hollow with hunger. He sits with his companions, the fire low, the night air cold. His instructor, a stern man with years etched into his face, asks a question not about poetry or philosophy, but about survival. What would you do if caught by the enemy? The boy must answer, and his words must be sharp, unhesitating. Hesitation is weakness, and weakness cannot be allowed. The boys wrestle in the dirt, their bodies pressed against the earth, learning strength through struggle. They race across fields, barefoot, dust rising around them, the sun sharp on their backs. They sing together as they march, their voices echoing against the hills, carrying the rhythm of unity. They sleep with little comfort, curled together for warmth. This is their world: hunger, hardship, and brotherhood. As they grow, the lessons deepen. They are sent into the wild with little more than a knife, told to survive with what they can find. This test is called the Kryptia, a shadowy practice that both hardened the boys and served another darker purpose, keeping the enslaved Helot population in fear. By stalking the countryside, hiding, stealing, even killing, the young Spartans learned stealth, ruthlessness, and the art of moving unseen. It was a test of manhood, a brutal reminder that survival in Sparta was not just about strength, but about control of the self, and control over others. But life in the Agoj was not without moments of tenderness, though they were rare and fleeting. A kind word from an elder, a successful raid for food shared among friends, the warmth of comradeship. After a long march, these small sparks of humanity gave light to the long, dark road of discipline. They learned not only to fight, but to live as one. And so, from 7 years old to adulthood, the boys of Sparta were molded, broken down, and built again, until they were no longer merely sons of families, but sons of the city. Every scar, every callus, every hunger pang, every bruise was a thread in the fabric of their identity. They were no longer boys, they were Spartans. This was the beginning of the warrior's life. A life not of choice, but of destiny. A life beyond comfort, beyond luxury, beyond even individuality. In Sparta, to live was to serve, and the Agoj was the furnace in which the steel of their spirit was forged. And as the sun sets over the Eurotas, and the boys gather once more in their barracks, voices low, bellies empty, hearts steady, they are already walking the path that will lead them into battle. The warrior is not born in war. He is born here in hunger and discipline, in the shadows of childhood, molded by the Agoj, beneath the watchful eyes of Sparta. Part 2. Training and Brotherhood. The boy who entered the Agoge at 7 years old has begun to change. The cloak on his shoulders, thin and worn, is no longer the oversized garment that once trailed behind him, but a second skin he wears with pride. His steps are firmer, his gaze sharper, his movements more deliberate. Years of hunger, lessons in silence, and long nights in the barracks have hardened his small frame, inked to mice. But childhood is only the first step. The path ahead is longer, more demanding, and filled with trials. The boy is now on the threshold of youth, and in Sparta, this meant the next stage of training, the forging of bonds and the deepening of discipline. The Agoge was not simply a school of endurance, it was a crucible where the individual was melted down and recast into part of a whole. The Spartans knew that one man alone was fragile, but many men moving as one, breathing as one, fighting as one, could become unstoppable. Brotherhood was not an accident of companionship. It was engineered, nurtured, and tested every day. At 12 years old, the boys of the Agoge were given new tasks. Their rations, already meager, were cut even further. Their beds of reeds were stripped bare, forcing them to sleep on the cold earth. They were expected to forage and steal with greater skill, to fight with fiercer determination, to obey with absolute loyalty. Each boy lived under the eyes of his companions and his masters. Failure was visible not only to the instructors, but also to the group, and shame was a punishment heavier than the lash. To be cast out or distrusted was a fate few could bear. Training became harsher. Wrestling, running, jumping, and combat drills filled their days. Their bodies, once those of children, were now lean, scarred, and wiry with muscle. They fought one another in contests, designed not simply to show strength, but to teach endurance. Bloodied noses, bruised ribs, and broken fingers were not unusual. The boys learned not to flinch, not to cry out, not to yield. They learned to fight until ordered to stop, for in Sparta, the command of the leader was the only measure of victory or defeat. And yet, beneath the harshness, a strange warmth grew. Bonds between the boys deepened, as suffering shared created ties that could not easily be broken. They learned to depend on one another, to share food in secret, to cover for each other when caught stealing, to guard each other's backs. One boy's pain was carried by the group, and one boy's triumph lifted all. Brotherhood became as natural as breathing, for without it, none could endure. Older youths, already nearing manhood, played a special role in this world. They were mentors, examples, sometimes even protectors. The younger boys looked up to them, imitated their manner, and sought their approval. These relationships, sometimes tender, sometimes stern, were part of the design. By binding the young to their elders, Sparta ensured that loyalty ran in chains through every generation. The Agoge also sharpened the mind. Lessons in reading and writing were minimal, just enough for basic communication, but wit and quick speech were prized. A Spartan boy was expected to answer questions with brevity, humor, and sharpness. Long speeches were dismissed. Clever replies were celebrated. It was said that words were like spears best when straight and to the point. The culture of laconic speech shaped not only the way Spartans talked, but the way they thought. To hesitate was weakness. To overthink was wasteful. What mattered was clarity, decisiveness, and impact. Punishments were constant, but they too carried lessons. A boy who failed to obey, who spoke too freely, or who faltered in courage, could expect a beating before his companions. Yet the punishment was not simply pain, it was humiliation. A reminder that discipline was not for the self, but for the whole. Each boy was a brick in the wall of Sparta, and a weak brick endangered the structure. By bearing pain in silence, he proved his worth. By enduring, he reaffirmed his place. Yet the Spartan system also allowed moments of pride and recognition. The best boys, those who showed leadership, cunning, or exceptional bravery, were singled out. They were given tasks of greater responsibility, expected to guide their peers, to lead small groups in hunts or raids, to represent their unit before their instructors. For them, the path to honor was open, and even in their youth, he could glimpse the possibility of one day standing in the ranks of the greatest warriors of Greece. Still, life in the Agage was never far from hunger. The boys' stomachs remained empty more often than full. Each day was a balance between what was given and what could be taken. Some crept into orchards to steal figs, others slipped into kitchens to snatch bits of bread, still others learned to hunt small animals with traps or slings. Success brought strength in secret feasts with friends. Failure brought lashes and humiliation. But even failure had its purpose, for it taught stealth, cunning, and vigilance. A Spartan warrior, after all, might one day need to slip unseen behind enemy lines, to live off the land, to endure without supply. Hunger was not simply suffering, it was preparation. And as the boys grew older, another test awaited them, the Krypteia, the secret trial. In the dark of night, youths were sent into the countryside, armed with little more than a knife. Their task was to survive, to stalk unseen, to strike when needed. Some say it was a rite of passage, teaching independence and ruthlessness. Others whisper it was also a means of keeping the Hillit population, the enslaved laborers who outnumbered Spartans many times over, under constant fear. Whatever its true purpose, the Krypteia left its mark on those who endured it. A boy returned from the shadows, not simply older, but changed. Through all of this, one lesson echoed above the rest. The self was nothing without the group. The phalanx, the tight formation of shield and spear, was not just a military tactic, it was the very image of Spartan society. Each boy learned that his shield was not for himself, but for the man beside him. To drop it in battle was to betray the brotherhood. To stand firm was to preserve it. The seeds of this lesson were planted in childhood, watered in youth, and brought to flower in manhood. Evenings in the barracks brought quieter moments. The boys gathered around small fires, their voices hushed. They sang hymns and war songs, their melodies carrying into the night. They shared tales of heroes and ancestors, of warriors who stood against impossible odds, of kings who died for Sparta. They whispered about home, about mothers and fathers. Though such thoughts were quickly silenced, for nostalgia was weakness. Yet in these moments, one could see the humanity beneath the hardness. The fragile child still lingering within the young warrior. As they lay side by side on their reed mats, their bodies aching, their stomachs hollow, they found comfort in proximity. Brotherhood was not an abstract idea. It was the warmth of another body in the cold night, the shared laugh after a stolen fig, the whispered word of encouragement after a beating. In this way, the Agage shaped not only soldiers, but companions, bound together in ways outsiders could never fully grasp. The boy who had once trembled at leaving his mother now moved with confidence among his peers. His shoulders broadened, his voice deepened, his gaze grew steady. He had endured hunger, pain, and humiliation. He had learned stealth, obedience, and courage. He had forged bonds that would follow him into battle. The Agage had taken him, stripped him, and rebuilt him into something new. What emerged was not merely a youth, but the beginning of a warrior, a man whose life was not his own, but belonged entirely to Sparta. The bonds of brotherhood, the rhythm of discipline, the scars of hardship, all had woven him into the fabric of the phalanx. Alone, he was nothing. Together, he and his brothers were everything. Dad. Tomorrow will bring more drills, more hunger, more punishment, more tests. Yet tomorrow will also bring another step into manhood, another stitch in the tapestry of brotherhood. In the silence of the night, the Agage whispers its lessons. Endure, obey, unite. This was the heart of Spartan training. Not the sword, not the spear, not the shield alone, but the bond between brothers. And in that bond lay the secret of Sparta's strength. Part 3. Hunger and Endurance. Hunger was not an accident in Sparta. It was not the result of poor harvests or mismanagement. It was a deliberate choice, woven into the training of every Spartan youth. To live hungry was to live alert, resourceful, disciplined. To feel the gnawing emptiness in one's stomach was to learn the lesson of restraint, to discover that strength did not come from abundance, but from deprivation. From the moment a boy entered the agoge, food was carefully rationed. Bread, porridge, sometimes a scrap of cheese or a handful of figs, it was never enough to leave him full. Meals were designed to sustain, but never to satisfy. The instructors reminded them often, a full belly makes a lazy body. A warrior must never grow to comfortable. Hunger, constant and sharp, would keep them lean, fast, and cunning. In the early years, the boys tried to endure quietly. They pressed their hands against their empty stomachs as they trained, wrestled, or ran long distances. They learned to ignore the grumbles, to swallow saliva as though it were food, to distract themselves with movement. But soon, hunger became more than endurance, it became a teacher. The boys were encouraged to steal, not as a sin, but as a skill. They learned to slip silently into orchards, to creep into kitchens, to snatch food from markets or granaries. The rule was simple: steal what you can, but never be caught. If a boy succeeded, his belly would be filled for a night, and perhaps his companions would share in his spoils. If he failed, the punishment was swift and brutal. Beatings were harsh, not because he had stolen, but because he had failed at stealth. Hunger and fear worked together, sharpening instincts and teaching lessons that could not be forgotten. To be a Spartan was to survive where others could not. Imagine the scene. A group of boys, lean and wiry, creeping through the shadows of the city by torchlight. Their bare feet make no sound against the stone streets. One slips beneath a fence, crawling toward the faint smell of bread cooling on a window ledge. Another crouches near the edge of a vineyard, watching for guards. Their hearts race, not only from fear, but from anticipation. The taste of a single stolen fig will feel like a feast after days of thin gruel. In the morning, their instructors will not ask where the food came from. They will not scold them for disobedience. They will only look to see if the boy has returned with scratches, bruises, or empty hands. Hunger was not only about filling the stomach, it was about cultivating stealth, courage, quickness of thought. These were weapons as important as any spear. As the boys grew older, hunger became something more than physical need. It became part of their identity. Spartan youth was known for his gaunt figure, his hollow cheeks, his wiry strength. Foreign visitors often remarked on their leanness, mistaking it for weakness. But Spartans themselves took pride in it. To be thin was proof of discipline. To eat little was proof of self-control. To endure without complaint was proof of strength. Hunger also taught them to value food in ways others did not. A crust of bread was a treasure. A handful of olives was a blessing. A bowl of black broth, the infamous Spartan dish made of pork boiled in blood, vinegar, and salt, was a meal to be savored, not mocked. Outsiders often sneered at this simple fare, claiming it was unfit for civilized men. But to Spartans, it was a symbol of their way of life. Harsh, unadorned, enduring. To eat like this was to remind themselves that luxury was the enemy of strength. The discipline of hunger extended into adulthood as well. Spartan soldiers, even at the height of their power, continued to live with frugal meals. Their communal dining halls, known as seseta, served simple fare in small portions. No man, not even a king, could demand more than his share. All were equal before the table, just as all were equal before the phalanx. Hunger united them as surely as training did. But hunger alone was not the only form of endurance. The agoge tested the body in countless ways. Sleep was scarce, clothing minimal, warmth uncertain. In winter, boys shivered beneath their single cloak, teeth clenched against the icy winds that swept down from the Tagetus Mountains. In summer, they endured the burning sun, sweat stinging their eyes as they marched across dusty plains. Blisters, cuts, bruises, all were treated not with pity but with indifference. A Spartan did not complain. Even punishments became lessons in endurance. A boy who faltered, who disobeyed, who failed in his tasks, might be whipped before his peers. The lash cut deep, but deeper still was the demand for silence. To cry out was to show weakness. To endure in silence was to prove strength. Stories were told of boys who clutched stolen food beneath their cloaks, enduring the whip without a sound, even as pain tore at their flesh. In Sparta, silence was as much a weapon as the spear. The lessons of hunger and endurance seeped into every aspect of life. Games were designed to test their limits. Boys wrestled until their bodies ached, ran until their lungs burned, leaped until their legs gave way. At festivals, competitions of pain and endurance were celebrated before the gods. One of the most famous was the ritual at the altar of Artemis Orthia, where boys were whipped until their backs bled. The one who endured longest without flinching or begging for mercy was crowned with honor. Outsiders saw cruelty. Spartans saw glory. Endurance was not limited to the body, extended to the mind. A Spartan boy learned to bear not only pain and hunger, but also humiliation. Instructors insulted them, tested them with trick questions, pushed them into impossible tasks. To fail was expected. To rise again, silently and steadily, was the true measure of worth. Every scar, every wound, every empty stomach was a reminder. Life was not meant to be easy. It was meant to forge something unbreakable. At night, when the boys lay on their mats of reeds, their stomachs rumbling, they whispered not of feasts or delicacies, but of survival. They shared stolen crumbs, split figs in half, passed pieces of dried meat from hand to hand. These small acts bound them together more tightly than any oath. Brotherhood was built not only on strength, but on shared suffering. They endured together, and so they became unshakable together. As they grew, hunger and endurance transformed into a quiet kind of pride. They began to look at outsiders, travelers, merchants, other Greeks with a certain disdain. Men who ate rich foods, who wore soft clothing, who lived in comfort, seemed weak to Spartan eyes. What would such men do in battle when the shield grew heavy and the stomach was empty? What would they do when the night grew cold and the enemy pressed hard? A Spartan knew the answer. He would endure. Others would break. The years of hunger left their mark. Even when grown into men, Spartans ate little, slept on hard beds, lived with restraint. Their bodies remained lean, their habits disciplined, their spirits hardened. Endurance became second nature. When they marched into battle, they carried not only weapons, but the memory of countless nights of hunger, countless lashes endured, countless hardships overcome. This, too, was part of the Spartan code. Strength was not given, it was earned. Discipline was not taught, it was lived. And endurance was not a momentary act, but a lifelong companion. So as the boy of the Agoge grew into youth, he carried with him the lessons of hunger. He learned that every meal was a test, every punishment a trial, every hardship a teacher. He learned that to endure silently was to grow stronger, and that strength was the only true currency in Sparta. In the silence of the night, the whispers of the Agoge surrounded him. Endure hunger, endure pain, endure all. For the one who endured was the one who would one day stand unbroken in the phalanx. Shield locked with brother, body hardened by trial, heart unyielding in the face of fear. And in this way, hunger, which to others was a curse, became to the Spartan a gift. Part 4. The Spartan Code of Silence. If hunger was the training of the body, silence was the training of the mind. Among all the Greek peoples, the Spartans became famous not only for their discipline in battle, but for the discipline of their words. To speak little, and to speak well, was considered a virtue equal to endurance. To waste breath in idle chatter was to show weakness. To choose words carefully and to let silence do the rest was to show strength. From the earliest days of the Agoge, boys were taught restraint in their speech. Questions were asked not to be answered quickly, but to test their ability to think before they spoke. Careless response brought scolding, or worse, punishment. Brevity was prized. Wit was prized. Above all, control was prized. A Spartan boy learned that silence carried weight, and that words, when used sparingly, struck harder than the lash. This practice became known to the wider world as laconic speech, named after Laconia, the region of Sparta itself. A Spartan might answer a long-winded question with a single sharp word. A Spartan general might reply to a threatening enemy letter with just a phrase. The famous example often told was when Philip of Macedon, father of Alexander the Great, sent a message to Sparta. "If I invade Laconia, I will drive you out." The Spartans replied with just one word: "If." Such answers were not accidents. They were the product of a culture that valued silence, where words were not decoration but tools, to be used sparingly and effectively. The young and the agoge. Silence was not only about speech, it was also about behavior. A boy who complained of hunger, of cold, of pain, betrayed weakness. A boy who endured quietly showed strength. When punished, he was expected to stand still, lips sealed, eyes steady. To cry out was shameful. To endure in silence was noble. Imagine the training ground of the agoge. A group of boys, dusty and weary from wrestling, sit in the dirt. An instructor, tall and stern, poses a riddle. Act! The first boy blurts out an answer too quickly, too eagerly. The instructor strikes him across the face, not for being wrong, but for being rash. Another boy waits, silent, eyes lowered, thoughts turning slowly. When he answers, his words are brief, but they strike true. The instructor nods. The lesson is learned. The value of silence extended into adulthood. In the Caesarea, the communal dining halls where Spartan men ate together, conversation was restrained. Discussions were direct, focused on matters of discipline, war, or the needs of the city. Boasting was frowned upon. Complaints were ignored. Stories were told sparingly, often with humor that was sharp, sometimes biting, but never drawn out. The meal was not for indulgence, either in food or in speech. This code of silence shaped not only their culture, but their reputation. To outsiders, Spartans appeared cold, aloof, even unfriendly. Other Greeks, with their love of poetry, drama, and rhetoric, often mocked the Spartans as unrefined, unable to appreciate the beauty of words. But beneath this simplicity was a deeper truth. The Spartans understood the power of silence and how it could mold both character and reputation. In battle, silence was as important as the shield. A Spartan phalanx advanced not with wild cries, but with measured steps and steady breath. The songs they sang before combat were not for noise, but for rhythm, to bind them together as one. Once the fighting began, words became rare. A simple command, a sharp order, a single glance, this was all that was needed. The discipline of silence learned in youth became the discipline of unity in war. But silence was not always harsh, it could also be protective. The fewer words a man spoke, the less he revealed of his fears, his doubts, his weaknesses. Silence guarded the heart. Among brothers in the agoge, silence was a shield as much as the wooden hoplon they would one day carry. To share too much was to open oneself. To remain quiet was to remain strong. Yet silence did not mean the absence of thought. If anything, it sharpened thought. A boy who could not fill the air with chatter learned to listen, to observe, to reflect inwardly. He learned to measure his feelings before revealing them, to weigh the value of a sentence before letting it pass his lips. Over time, this produced a mind that was sharp, a wit that was quick, a tongue that could cut deeper than the spear when used rightly. Consider again the stories told of Spartan brevity. A visiting foreigner might ask, "Why do your warriors wear their hair long?" Spartan would answer, "Because it makes the handsome more beautiful and the ugly more frightening." When asked why Spartan swords were shorter than those of other Greeks, a soldier might reply, "So we may come closer to the enemy." In every exchange, the answer was brief, decisive, and often tinged with a sharp edge of humor. These words revealed not ignorance, but mastery. Perhaps the deepest lesson of silence was not wit, but composure. To endure without speaking, to hold fast without crying out, was to cultivate inner strength. A Spartan boy might be whipped at the altar of Artemis, his back torn with lashes, blood dripping to the ground. He would stand firm, lips sealed, even smiling through the agony, not because he felt no pain, but because silence was stronger than pain. Outsiders saw cruelty, Spartans saw triumph. The code of silence was not absolute. In private moments, in whispers between comrades, words were shared briefly, carefully, with weight. Brotherhood thrived not on constant speech, but on trust built in silence. A glance, a gesture, the simple sharing of stolen bread spoke more than hours of chatter ever could. In this way, silence itself became a language, one understood only by those who had walked the same path, endured the same trials, lived through the same hunger. Silence also served the city as a whole. In assemblies, Spartan kings and elders were not known for long speeches. Decisions were made with minimal debate, for to waste time with endless words was considered folly. Action was valued more than rhetoric. Other Greeks, especially the Athenians, with their love of democracy and oratory, found this strange. But Sparta was not built on persuasion. It was built on unity, and silence was its mortar. As the years passed, a boy who had been silent through punishment, silent through hunger, silent through training, grew into a man whose very presence carried weight. A Spartan warrior needed not to shout to command respect. His silence, his calm, his steady eyes spoke for him. In a world where many sought to impress with noise, the Spartan impressed with stillness. Yet silence was not without cost. Many emotions, many fears, many longings were buried beneath it. A Spartan man learned never to speak openly of pain, never to admit to weakness, never to voice doubts. The weight of silence could be heavy, pressing inward on the heart. But to Spartans, that weight was a price worth paying. Better to endure in silence than to break the code. Better to carry the burden alone than to shame the brotherhood with complaint. And so the Spartan code of silence endured through generations. It was a discipline that began in childhood, shaped the mind in youth, and defined the man in adulthood. It was a silence that spoke louder than words, a silence that carried through barracks, through dining halls, through the march of the phalanx, and into the annals of history. When the world remembers Sparta, it remembers not only the clash of shields, the cry of war, or the legend of Thermopylae. It remembers the silence, the quiet endurance of boys in the agoge, the sharp brevity of their replies, the composure of warriors who did not waste words. In a world of endless voices, the Spartans chose silence. And in that silence, they found strength. Part 5. The Discipline of the Phalanx. The training of the Spartan warrior reached its true purpose, not in the dusty yards of the agoge, nor in the quiet discipline of silence, nor even in the long nights of hunger and endurance. All of those lessons were only fragments of something greater. Pieces of a puzzle that would only reveal its full image on the battlefield. That image was the phalanx, the great wall of men, shields locked, spears bristling, moving as one body, one rhythm, one force. The phalanx was more than a formation. It was the soul of Sparta made flesh. Every hardship of childhood, every bruise from training, every night of hunger, every lash endured, without a cry, every moment of silence. All of it was designed to prepare a man for this single reality, that he was not an individual, but part of a whole. In the phalanx, the measure of a Spartan was not how brightly he shone alone, but how firmly he stood with his brothers. Picture the field before battle. The morning air is heavy, the ground churned with the footsteps of thousands. Across the plain stands the enemy, their spears glinting in the sun, their voices rising in songs and shouts. But from the Spartan lines there is no noise, only the low hum of preparation. Warriors adjust their shields, tighten their straps, glance once at their comrades. No words are needed. They have trained for this moment since boyhood. The shield, the hoplon, was the heart of the phalanx. It was heavy, made of wood and bronze, large enough to cover the body from chin to knee. But its true power was not in protecting the man who carried it, but in protecting the man to his left. Each Spartan held his shield to cover his neighbor, leaving only a sliver of his own body exposed. To fight in the phalanx was to live for the man beside you. To drop your shield was not merely cowardice, it was betrayal. Is why Spartan mothers, as legend tells, sent their sons to war with the words, "Return with your shield, or on it." To lose one's spear or helmet was forgivable. To lose the shield was unthinkable. The spear could defend only oneself. The shield defended the line, and the line was everything. The discipline of hunger prepared the body to endure the long marches and meager rations of war. The discipline of endurance prepared the spirit to suffer wounds, heat, and exhaustion without breaking. The discipline of silence prepared the mind to obey quickly, to respond without hesitation, to understand without endless chatter. And the discipline of brotherhood, the bonds forged in childhood trials, ensured that no man stood alone. In the phalanx, these lessons converged. The march of the phalanx was a sight both terrifying and mesmerizing. Step by step, shield to shield, the Spartans advanced. Their sandals pressed into the earth in unison, a single beat echoing like the rhythm of a great drum. They moved not as hundreds of men, but as one great creature, breathing together, moving together, striking together. The spears jutted forward like the spines of a hedgehog, ready to pierce flesh. Their silence was heavier than any war cry, a silence that told the enemy, "We do not need to shout, because we are certain." Within the phalanx, every man carried a role. The front ranks bore the weight of impact, the terrible clash when two armies met shield against shield, spear against spear. Behind them, the ranks pressed forward, adding their strength, their weight, their will. The pressure was immense. The frontline warriors were crushed by the shields of their brothers behind them, as well as by the enemy pressing from the front. Breathing became difficult, limbs trembled, bodies strained. But this was the moment they had trained for since childhood, to endure. Here, silence mattered more than ever. In the chaos of battle, endless words would bring confusion, panic, collapse. Instead, commands were few, sharp, and clear. A single order might be given to advance, to hold, to wheel left or right. The rest was instinct, drilled endlessly through training, etched into muscle and mind. Each man trusted the man beside him, and that trust was unbreakable. The brotherhood of the Agoge came alive in the phalanx. Spartan did not fight for abstract glory or personal fame. He fought for the man beside him, the comrade who had endured hunger with him, who had bled with him in training, who had shared silence and punishment, who had marched with him under the same sun. To abandon the line was to abandon that bond, to destroy something sacred. The phalanx demanded sacrifice of individuality. Alone, a warrior might dart, strike, and boast. But in the phalanx, a warrior had to submerge himself into the greater whole. His movements were not his own, but the line's. His survival depended not on his courage alone, but on the discipline of all. A weak link, a man who broke formation, endangered everyone. Thus, every hardship of the Spartan system had been designed to strip away selfishness, to build unity so unyielding that on the battlefield they moved like one body. To the enemy, the phalanx was a wall that seemed unbreakable. Many armies relied on shouts, charges, or scattered bravery. Against Sparta, they met something else entirely: order. A line that advanced with the inevitability of a tide. Spears darted from behind shields, thrusting with deadly precision. Shields overlapped, pushing forward with relentless pressure. The phalanx was less a clash of men than a grinding machine of bronze and flesh, crushing anything in its path. The true test came not at the beginning of the battle, but in the endless press of minutes and hours. As the sun burned overhead, sweat ran into eyes, blood smeared across arms and legs, bodies collapsed underfoot. The line trembled, bent, shifted. But discipline held it together. Every lesson in hunger, every lash of endurance, every word unspoken, forged the will to stand when standing seemed impossible. In those moments, when breath burned in the lungs and limbs ached beyond strength, a Spartan remembered the silence of the Agoge. He remembered enduring punishment without a cry, holding back tears when pain tore at his body. That silence returned now, as a deeper strength. He clenched his teeth, pressed his shield harder into his neighbor's, drove his spear forward again. He knew his comrade was doing the same. The phalanx endured. When the enemy broke, as they often did, the phalanx advanced with renewed force. Shields pressed forward, spears struck down, and the disciplined machine of men drove its foes into retreat. Victory belonged not to the strongest warrior or the loudest voice, but to the discipline of the line. And yet, even in victory, Spartans remained restrained. There were no wild celebrations, no extravagant boasting. Their discipline extended beyond the battlefield. Silence returned.
Oh, composure!
Composure returned. The phalanx was dismantled, but the bond it forged endured. Each man returned knowing he had stood not as one, but as part of something larger than himself, something greater, something eternal. The discipline of the phalanx was not only military, it was cultural, spiritual, a reflection of Sparta itself. A society built on unity, on restraint, on endurance, had created a weapon that mirrored its values. Where other cities celebrated poetry, art, and speech, Sparta celebrated the silence of the line, the endurance of the body, the unity of the shield wall. To live as a Spartan was to be trained from childhood to hold one's place in that wall. To die as a Spartan was to fall within it, shield locked, refusing to break. This was the highest honor, not to shine alone, but to endure together. And so the phalanx stood as the final convergence of all Spartan lessons. Hunger gave the body strength. Endurance gave the spirit steel. Silence gave the mind clarity. Brotherhood gave the soul unity. Together, they created the most feared formation in Greece and one of the most enduring symbols of discipline in all of history. The phalanx was more than a tactic. It was a way of life, a philosophy, a reflection of an entire society. To understand it was to understand Sparta itself, a city that taught its sons to fight, not as individuals, but as one. A city that believed true strength was not in words, but in silence, not in freedom, but in discipline, not in self, but in brotherhood. In the dust of the battlefield, under the weight of shields and the glare of the sun, the lessons of a lifetime came together. The Spartan phalanx stood unbroken, and in its shadow, history itself would remember the power of discipline forged in silence, hunger, and endurance. Part 6. The Spartan Way of Death. Death for the Spartan was not an ending to be feared, but a duty to be fulfilled. From the moment a boy entered the agoge, he was prepared not only to fight but to die if the polis demanded it. This quiet acceptance of mortality was the foundation upon which the entire Spartan code rested. To understand the Spartan way of death is to understand how an entire society built itself on sacrifice, on the belief that the individual existed not for himself, but for the city, for Sparta. Imagine a Spartan mother sending her son to war. In most lands, a mother might whisper prayers for her son's safety, might beg him to return to her, might weep as he marched away. But in Sparta, the farewell was different. A mother's parting words were not of safety, but of honor. She handed him his shield and told him simply, "Return with it or on it." Those words carried within them the heart of the Spartan philosophy. To return with one's shield was to return victorious, the line unbroken. To return on it was to return lifeless, but still faithful, having fallen in the line. To come back without the shield meant one had fled, abandoned the phalanx, betrayed the city. That shame was worse than death. This unyielding belief shaped the way Spartans approached battle, did not fight with hesitation, clinging to life. They fought with clarity, with a stillness of purpose. Death was not an accident to fear, but an expectation to embrace, should it arrive. Every step they took on the battlefield was taken with the knowledge that it might be their last, and that such an end was not failure, but fulfillment. For the Spartans, to die well was more important than to live long. A long life of dishonor was meaningless. Short life lived with discipline, sacrifice, and loyalty to the polis carried eternal value. They believed that memory itself, the remembrance of the fallen by their city and comrades, was a kind of immortality. Only two groups of Spartans were granted the honor of having their names inscribed on their graves: men who died in battle and women who died in childbirth. This reveals much about the Spartan view of life and death. To fall in battle or to give life in childbirth were both seen as sacrifices for the city, acts in which the individual body was given up so that the collective might endure. All other deaths passed without inscription, unmarked, because they did not embody that ultimate service. Picture the field after a Spartan battle. The line has held, the enemy has broken, but the ground is littered with bodies. Among the fallen lie Spartans, shields still clasped, spears broken in their hands. Their comrades gather them with solemn care, laying them upon their shields to be carried home. There is no wailing, no display of grief, as might be seen in other lands. In Sparta, mourning was restrained, for grief was not to overshadow honor. Even in death, silence and discipline prevailed. The funerals of Spartan warriors were simple. The body was carried with dignity, buried without elaborate monuments or lavish offerings. There were no golden masks, no towering tombs, no extravagant displays of wealth. The true monument of a Spartan warrior was not a grave, but the memory of his discipline, his endurance, his sacrifice in the phalanx. The city itself was the tomb of its warriors, for their lives had been lived entirely in its service. The Spartan way of death extended beyond the battlefield. From an early age, boys were taught to think little of their individual survival. Hunger, punishment, and hardship trained them to detach from the comforts of life, to see the body as expendable, the spirit as belonging to the polis. Even the practice of silence prepared them for death, teaching them to face pain and even final moments without fear or outcry. Die without complaint was as important as to fight without hesitation. Consider the great story of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans, led by King Leonidas, held the pass against the vast Persian army. Though the numbers are debated by historians, the essence remains. Spartans fought, knowing death was certain. They did not despair, for to fall there was the highest honor. Leonidas and his men chose to stand, not for victory, but for sacrifice, to buy time for Greece, to show the world that a few could resist many when bound by discipline and courage. In Sparta, the tale of Thermopylae was not one of tragic loss, but of glorious fulfillment. They had lived as Spartans, and they had died as Spartans. Women, too, played a role in the Spartan way of death. Spartan mothers were famed for their stern resolve. A mother who lost a son in battle grieved quietly with dignity, for she knew he had upheld the code. A mother whose son returned without his shield, dishonored, might feel shame greater than sorrow. The culture demanded this level of discipline, even in grief. In such stories, we see that the Spartan way of death was not only for the soldier, but was woven into the very fabric of society, shared by families, reinforced by every citizen. This acceptance of mortality created a paradox. By being taught to treat death as inevitable and even desirable in service to the polis, Spartans lived with a clarity that freed them from hesitation. Their courage was not recklessness, but calm inevitability. They did not rush into battle blindly. They advanced with steady steps, knowing that their lives had already been given long before the first spear was thrown. In this way, they achieved a kind of serenity in battle, a composure that terrified enemies. Yet beneath this discipline lay humanity. Spartans felt fear, as all men do, but they were taught not to show it. So they loved their families, their comrades, their lives in the Eurotas Valley. So they laughed, they shared meals, they felt the sting of loss. What made them different was the way they placed all of that love into the service of the city. When a man died in battle, he died with the belief that his sacrifice protected his family, his brothers, his land. Death was not abandonment, but a final gift to those he left behind. The Spartan way of death also left a legacy in memory. Other Greeks admired it, even if they did not imitate it. Poets wrote of Spartan courage, of their laconic sayings, of their unflinching resolve in the face of death. Inscribed on the stone at Thermopylae were the words, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. In that simple line lies the essence of Sparta: obedience, law, sacrifice, and the calm acceptance of death. As the sun sets over the valley of Sparta, one can imagine the graves of warriors lying quietly beneath the earth. There are no towering monuments, no grand mausoleums, only the land itself, holding those who gave their lives for it. Above them, the olive trees sway in the evening wind, the river murmurs softly, and the mountains keep silent watch. The Spartan dead are at peace, their sacrifice complete, their memory woven forever into the fabric of their city. The way of death for Sparta was not an interruption of life, but its culmination. It was the natural end of the discipline begun in childhood, carried through hunger, endurance, silence, brotherhood in battle. To die for the polis was not to lose life, but to fulfill it. And so the Spartans lived always in the shadow of death, not with dread, but with readiness, knowing that their lives were not their own, but a gift already offered. In the stillness of this truth lies the heart of Sparta, a people who did not fear death because they had been taught to give it meaning, people who believed that honor was eternal even when the body was not. And so, to walk among the Spartans is to walk among men and women who lived every day prepared for the final sacrifice, who carried their shields not for themselves but for one another, who faced mortality with calm resolve, and who taught the world that the greatest strength lies not in clinging to life, but in giving it for something greater. Part 7. Rituals, Religion, the Spartan Gods. As the Spartan warrior lived and died under the code of the polis, he also lived and died under the watchful eyes of the gods. To the Spartans, discipline and sacrifice were not only civic duties, but sacred obligations. Their lives were framed by ritual, and their acceptance of mortality was reinforced by the divine. In the stillness of dawn, in the quiet before training or battle, Spartans turned not only to their leaders and comrades, but also to the unseen powers who ruled the heavens, the earth, and the fates of men. Religion in Sparta was less about personal devotion and more about collective duty, much like everything else in their society. Each offering, each prayer, each ritual sacrifice was made not for individual salvation, but for the strength of the community. A Spartan prayed as a soldier marched, in unison with others, bound by duty. Yet, within that structure, there were moments of awe, of mystery. When the fire of sacrifice rose into the night, and the scent of burnt offerings mingled with the mountain winds, the gods of Sparta were many, but none more central than Artemis Orthia. Her sanctuary lay outside the city, near the banks of the Eurotas River, where young boys were brought to be tested. Here, under the gaze of the goddess, ritual and training became one. The whipping contest of Artemis Orthia was infamous even among other Greeks. Boys endured lashes while standing before her altar, sometimes until they fainted or died, proving their endurance not only to their elders, but to the goddess herself. To the Spartans, this was not cruelty, but consecration. The pain was sacred, the endurance divine, a bond between mortal discipline and immortal expectation. Imagine the scene, the temple torches flickering, the air filled with chants, the smell of blood and incense mingling. The boys stand in silence, their faces unmoving, while the lash strikes again and again. Around them, the community watches, mothers and fathers included, their expressions steady, for this too was part of the Spartan way. The goddess demanded endurance, and the polis demanded proof. Those who withstood the pain were not merely hardened for battle. They were consecrated by ritual, their courage sanctified. Beyond Artemis Orthia, the Spartans revered Apollo, the god of light, harmony, and prophecy. His voice was sought at Delphi before great decisions, and his music and order were reflected in the discipline of the phalanx. Apollo represented clarity and restraint, virtues essential to Spartan life. The Spartans also honored Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, though in their own austere way. She represented strategy, discipline, the quiet strength that guided the hand on the spear. Then there was Zeus, king of gods, whose festivals were occasions of both competition and worship. During the Olympic Games, which Spartans attended with zeal, They honored him through athletic excellence. For Spartans, physical prowess itself was an offering to the divine. Each leap, each throw, each display of strength and control was not merely sport but sacred demonstration. Sacrifice was central to their rituals. Animals were offered before battles, the entrails examined for omens. The soldiers gathered in silence as priests read the signs, waiting to know whether the gods favored their advance. In these moments, the warriors stood not only as soldiers, but as participants in a sacred dialogue between the human and the divine. Their courage on the battlefield was tethered to the belief that the gods had sanctioned their struggle. At the festival of the Carnea, dedicated to Apollo, Sparta came to a stillness. This was one of their most important celebrations, marked by music, poetry, and ritual hunts. No battles could be fought during this festival, a restriction that sometimes shaped the course of wars. Even in the face of external threats, the rhythms of the divine were not to be broken. In this, we see again how the Spartan understanding of life and death was deeply bound to their gods. Obedience to the divine order came before even the urgency of survival. The Hyacinthia was another festival, honoring Apollo and commemorating Hyacinthus, a youth loved by the god who died tragically. The Spartans marked this with both mourning and celebration, songs of grief followed by dances of joy, reflecting the cycle of life and death, sorrow and renewal. Through such rituals, Spartans acknowledged that mortality was not an end, but part of the eternal balance governed by the gods. The daily life of a Spartan was also quietly filled with smaller rituals. Before meals, they poured libations. Before training, they offered prayers. Soldiers carried small tokens of the divine, simple amulets or carvings, reminders that their endurance was not theirs alone but guided by higher powers. Even silence itself could be sacred, a recognition that the gods heard not only words, but also the discipline of restraint. Consider the role of omens and prophecy. Spartans, like other Greeks, turned often to the oracles, particularly that of Delphi. Before great wars, delegations were sent to ask the god Apollo's guidance. The words of the oracle were often cryptic, yet to Spartans, they carried the weight of destiny. To march into battle with the oracle's approval was to march not only with comrades, but with the gods at one's side. This gave Spartans a calmness that puzzled their enemies. They fought with the certainty that their path had been sanctioned by powers beyond the mortal world. In times of hardship, ritual became a source of resilience. When famine struck, or when the helots threatened revolt, Spartans turned to the gods with sacrifices and festivals. These were not distractions, but reinforcements of unity. To gather together in prayer and ritual was to remind themselves that they were not alone, that discipline and endurance were shared not only among men but between men and gods. The acceptance of death, central to the Spartan code, was also reinforced by these rituals. Sacrifice in battle mirrored sacrifice on the altar. To shed blood for the polis was to shed blood in the pattern of offerings given to the gods. Just as the animal fell so that the community might be favored, so too did the Spartan warrior fall so that his city might endure. In this parallel, death became not an end, but a sacred act, an echo of divine will. The gods also shaped the roles of women in Sparta. Unlike many other Greek cities, Spartan women held a unique place of respect and responsibility. They prayed, they managed households, they honored the gods through festivals. In childbirth, their suffering was seen as a form of sacrifice, akin to a warrior's death. When women sang hymns during festivals, or watched their sons tested at Artemis Orthia's altar, they participated in the same cycle of discipline and devotion. Religion reinforced their role as givers of life, sustainers of the polis, bound as tightly to divine expectation as the men. In the stillness of the Spartan night, one can imagine the glow of sacred fires rising from the temples, the chants carrying softly across the valley, mingling with the sound of the river. The stars above, clear and endless, were themselves reminders of the divine, the eternal order within which the brief lives of men unfolded. To the Spartans, these rituals were not burdens, but harmonies, ways of aligning their harsh lives with the rhythm of the cosmos. It is easy to think of Spartans only as warriors, hardened and silent, yet they were also a deeply religious people. Their austerity did not strip away spirituality, but shaped it into discipline. For them, faith and sacrifice were inseparable. Every lash endured, every meal shared, every shield carried into battle was a ritual act, performed not only for the city, but under the gaze of gods who demanded strength, silence, and courage. As we step back and reflect, the Spartan way of life and death cannot be separated from their rituals and their gods. Without the divine, their discipline would have been only endurance. With the divine, it became something more, an offering, a consecration of the body and spirit to a higher order. The phalanx was not only a military formation, but a sacred harmony. Each man a note in a song written by law, discipline, and the gods. In the end, the Spartan way of death was not grim, but sanctified, and the Spartan way of life was not merely harsh, but holy. Their rituals, their sacrifices, their festivals, and their silences all spoke of a people who saw themselves as part of something eternal. Threads woven into the fabric of divine expectation. To live for Sparta was to live for the gods. And so, with quiet steps, the Spartans walked through life and death, as though both were part of the same sacred journey. Part 8. The Shadow of the Helots. To understand the life of a Spartan warrior is also to understand the silent presence that loomed behind every step of his discipline. The Helots. The Helots were the enslaved population of Sparta, tied to the land and tasked with labor that sustained the city's wealth, agriculture, and comfort. Yet their lives and the constant vigilance required of the Spartans created a shadow that stretched over every courtyard, training ground, and battlefield. The shadow of the Helots was not dramatic, not noisy, but subtle, persistent, shaping both fear and discipline in the hearts of Sparta citizens. Imagine the early morning. The sun has not yet risen, and the Eurotas Valley is bathed in a gentle, silvery light. In the distance, faint sounds emerge from the fields. The rhythm of tools striking the earth. The murmured voices of helots tending the land. These sounds are familiar, almost like the quiet hum of a city breathing. To the Spartan, they are also reminders. Reminders of the labor that sustains them, and reminders of the potential threat that lies in the dependence itself. The Spartans' training, their silence, their endurance, all of these were intertwined with this awareness. A Spartan could never afford complacency. While they cultivated discipline, honed the phalanx, and accepted death on the battlefield. The Helots remained under a system designed to keep them subdued. Spartans learned early to walk with awareness, to note subtle movements in the distance, to sense shifts in routine. This vigilance was not paranoia, it was a constant, quiet responsibility. The relationship was complex. Helots provided the sustenance that allowed Spartan men to dedicate their lives entirely to training and warfare. They planted and harvested the crops, tended the flocks, and built the infrastructure. Without their labor, Spartan warriors would have needed to feed themselves. To toil in the sun rather than endure the rigors of the agoge or practice the phalanx. Yet at the same time, Spartans were acutely aware of the power that their numbers represented. The Helots often outnumbered the Spartan citizens many times over. This imbalance created a careful, ever-present tension that shaped the city's entire rhythm. During festivals and religious observances, this tension was mirrored in ritual. The Cryptia, a secretive rite of passage for young Spartan men, was directly connected to the Helots. In this shadowy practice, adolescents were sent into the countryside at night, armed with only small daggers to test their courage and cunning. They were instructed to observe the Helots, sometimes to punish those deemed dangerous, a grim lesson in both stealth and authority. Though the Cryptia was cloaked in ritual, it was also a practical education, a lesson in control, surveillance, and the burdens of power. The presence of the Helots influenced the very texture of daily Spartan life. Meals were shared, but never in ignorance. Training was rigorous, but always under the knowledge that the city depended upon the labor of others to sustain it. The Spartan soldier learned that freedom came not from comfort, but from discipline, vigilance, and the constant acknowledgement of forces beyond his immediate control. Life, even in its most mundane routines, carried the weight of awareness. This awareness extended to the fields where the helots worked. Spartan boys on the Agoj would sometimes be sent to the outskirts, observing, and in small ways, interacting with the helot population. Even in these moments, the lesson was quiet but clear. The strength of Sparta lay not only in its warriors, but in the careful maintenance of control, the constant balance between dependence and dominance. There were no dramatic confrontations in these early lessons, only subtle observation, a sensitivity to the world beyond the training yard. The shadow of the helots also informed Spartan governance. Laws, councils, and military decisions were always shaped by the knowledge that rebellion could occur. Discipline, both in daily life and in the phalanx, was partly a preparation for this social reality. Spartans could not afford to be distracted by personal indulgence. Their very survival depended on a disciplined citizenry, capable of responding swiftly to threats within and without. Yet, for all the tension, there was also a quiet interdependence. City could not exist without the helots, and they could not exist without the city. This paradox was never solved, only managed, and it shaped the rhythms of Spartan life. Warriors rose before dawn to train, their muscles stiff from exercise, their minds alert to danger. Meanwhile, the helots rose to work the fields, unaware in most cases of the precise boundaries that controlled their lives, yet providing the sustenance that allowed the Spartans rigorous routines. Both groups, though in vastly different circumstances, were connected in a delicate, unspoken web. Even in moments of rest, the shadow persisted. Spartan walking through the city at dusk, after training or after a communal meal, could sense it in the quiet streets, in the distant flicker of torches, in the rhythm of life continuing around him. It was a reminder that freedom, discipline, and honor came with responsibility, with awareness, and with constant, careful watchfulness. The fear of rebellion was always tempered by ritual and ceremony. Festivals, sacrifices, and public assemblies reinforced unity, both to strengthen the citizens and to demonstrate authority to those under their control. The Spartans' religion, discipline, and customs created not only a culture of endurance, but also a society structured to prevent unrest. In this sense, the shadow of the helots was a silent teacher, guiding Spartans toward a life of vigilance, patience, and unbroken resolve. To the young boys in the Agoj, the lessons of the helots were subtle but profound. Every march, every drill, every whispered command in the night emphasized that discipline extended beyond training grounds. The world was never entirely safe, and freedom was always conditional. Understanding this early, internalizing it quietly, was as important as mastering the spear or the shield. When the Spartan warriors eventually stood on the battlefield, the shadow of the helots did not vanish. It remained in the structure of society behind them, in the order they defended, in the necessity of maintaining control, even in the midst of chaos. The soldiers' calm and unshakable discipline was reinforced by this awareness. That strength was measured not only against enemies, but against the delicate balance that sustained their city. Thus, the shadow of the helots was never a source of panic, but of education. It was a quiet force, shaping the minds, the endurance, and the awareness of every Spartan warrior. Their discipline, their courage, their unflinching calm on the battlefield, and their readiness to die, all of these were informed by the knowledge that the world around them required careful attention, and that vigilance was part of the honor they carried. Even as the sun sets over Sparta, casting long shadows across the training yards and fields, one can imagine the stillness of the city. The warriors return from their drills, bodies weary, minds alert. The helots continue their work, and the delicate balance persists, quiet and unbroken. The shadow of the helots, though invisible, is present in every glance, every step, every disciplined motion. It is a reminder of the interconnectedness of all life in Sparta, of the burdens of responsibility, and of the constant gentle tension that shaped one of the most disciplined societies in history. In this way, the shadow is not simply fear. It is education. It is vigilance. It is part of the rhythm that defines the Spartan life. Every soldier carries it, every citizen feels it, every ritual reinforces it. It is neither cruel nor harsh, it is essential. And through this shadow, the lessons of the agoge, the phalanx, the Spartan code of silence, the endurance through hunger, and the acceptance of mortality all converge into a life lived in quiet, constant preparedness. The presence of the helots, the knowledge of the delicate balance that sustained their society, the quiet fear that shaped their discipline, all of it formed the final, invisible teacher of the Spartan youth.
Nice.
In the stillness of dawn, the glint of bronze on shields, the muted steps of training columns, and the soft hum of the uratas, one senses this unseen instructor. It was always there, guiding them, shaping them, ensuring that, when the moment came, the Spartan would be ready, unwavering, and disciplined to the last breath. In the shadow lies the wisdom of Sparta, not in overt struggle or violence, but in constant awareness, in silent observation, and in the recognition that strength comes not only from the body but from vigilance, patience, and disciplined attention. To understand the shadow is to understand why Spartans endured, why they excelled, why they built a society both feared and admired. And so, as night settles over the city, with torches flickering against the stone and the Eurytos murmuring softly, the Spartans sleep lightly. Even in rest, the shadow persists, teaching, reminding, shaping. It is a quiet presence, a subtle force, one that ensures that the lessons of endurance, discipline, and sacrifice are never forgotten. The shadow of the helots is never loud, but it is profound, shaping the Spartan soul and guiding the hand of every warrior at the edge of dawn, at the heart of the city, and on the field of battle. Part 9. The Spartan March to War. The morning air carries a quiet chill as the Spartan. Warriors prepare to leave the city for another campaign. The sun has just begun to brush the tops of the hills surrounding Sparta, casting long shadows across the training grounds, the temples, and the cobblestone streets. There is no fanfare here, no drums of triumph, only the slow, deliberate rhythm of preparation, the tightening of sandals, the adjustment of shields, the silent inspection of spears. Each action, however small, is performed with care, with discipline, with a mindfulness born of years of training and ritual. To march for war in Sparta is not merely to move from one place to another. It is to enter a state of awareness, to synchronize body, mind, and spirit with the weight of the city and the expectations of the gods. The soldiers gather quietly, forming lines and columns with precise alignment.
Oh.
Each warrior feels the presence of his companions, the subtle shifting of the phalanx, the almost imperceptible tension in the air. This tension is not panic, it is attentiveness, a deep and calm understanding that every step, every movement is part of a larger order. Imagine yourself walking among them. Armor is heavy, yet worn to fit the contours of each body. The bronze glints faintly in the morning light. The leather straps press into the skin, the weight of the shield rests against the shoulder. Each footfall is measured, deliberate, echoing softly against stone and earth. The cadence of the march is quiet but constant, a rhythm that carries the mind into focus, that steadies the heart for the road ahead. Even as they march, the soldiers are aware of the land itself. The hills, the valleys, the forests, they are all familiar, yet ever-changing. They note the subtle signs in nature, the direction of the wind, the movement of birds, the rustle of leaves. To a Spartan, these details are more than scenery. They are part of the silent conversation with the world around them. Awareness is a form of preparation. To observe, to notice. To be present, this is as important as any drill or sparring session. The march is punctuated by quiet moments. Pause near a stream to drink, the subtle clink of water against bronze, the soft murmuring of a companion. Even in these moments, the soldiers maintain their discipline. Conversation is sparse, measured often nothing more than necessary instructions or brief exchanges. Silence is respected. It is a companion as vital as the shield, a reminder that focus and control extend beyond the battlefield. Beyond the physical aspects, the march is also a journey through memory and reflection. Each soldier carries experiences from the agoge, the early lessons in endurance, the secret of night exercises, the whip at Artemis Orthia's altar, the long hours of hunger and cold. Each memory is a quiet teacher, reinforcing patience, resilience, and the understanding that hardship is a part of life, as necessary as air or water. The rhythm of the march becomes a meditation, a slow unfolding of both body and mind. The landscape stretches and shifts as they travel. Hills give way to plains. The scent of pine mingles with the dry earth. Streams wind through the valleys, reflecting the light of the sun in small, flickering patterns. The soldiers notice these details not because they are beautiful, though they often are, but because they are part of the living world that surrounds them. To march in harmony with this world is to practice balance, to move as part of a greater rhythm, to align oneself with forces both seen and unseen. There is also a quiet awareness of the people they leave behind. Spartan women and children remain in the city, tending to homes, religious duties, and the land. The warriors carry their absence in subtle ways. A glance toward the hills where the city lies. A faint tightening of the chest at the thought of loved ones. A resolve to uphold the order and security that sustains them all. The march, though physically distant from home, is never entirely detached. It is a continuation of duty, a reaffirmation of the bonds between citizens, between families, between city and soldier. Along the way, the soldiers encounter small villages and outposts. These are quiet places, often simple, with smoke rising gently from clay rooftops, animals stirring in pens, the muted sound of water being drawn from wells. The Spartans move respectfully through these spaces, noting the routines of others, acknowledging the labor that supports life beyond the city. Every observation is part of the awareness that defines their existence. Understanding the world, reading it, anticipating its patterns. The march also incorporates ritual. Before long stretches, the warriors offer silent prayers, brief gestures to Artemis, Apollo, and Athena, asking for endurance, clarity, and protection. Sometimes small tokens are left at crossroads or on hilltops, simple offerings of grain or wine, gestures of respect to the gods who watch over the land. These rituals are brief, quiet, unadorned, yet they serve as reminders of the connection between mortal effort and divine oversight, between human discipline and the eternal patterns of the cosmos. Fatigue inevitably arises as the hours stretch into days. Muscles ache, feet blister, backs grow sore under the weight of shields and armor. Yet the rhythm of the march absorbs these discomforts. Pain becomes background, part of the pattern, acknowledged but not dwelled upon. Spartan training has conditioned both body and mind to accept hardship as ordinary, to move through it without complaint. The act of marching itself is a form of meditation, a slow, deliberate rehearsal of endurance, patience, and control. Evenings along the road are calm. When the sun sinks low, the soldiers make camp, pitching simple shelters or resting near natural formations that provide some cover. Fires are lit quietly, their glow warm and reassuring against the approaching night. The smell of smoke mixes with the scent of earth and vegetation, grounding aroma that signals rest without disrupting the disciplined order of the day. Meals are shared with minimal words, bread and dried meats consumed slowly, each bite reinforcing both sustenance and mindfulness. Night brings another layer of awareness. Darkness is embraced, not feared. Guards are stationed at regular intervals, the soft scraping of spear tips, and the subtle crunch of footsteps in the dirt creating a quiet rhythm of vigilance. The soldiers lie in their simple shelters, muscles relaxed, yet minds attentive to sounds, to movements, to the faint rustle of wind or leaves. Even sleep is tempered with readiness, a calm consciousness that tomorrow will bring new miles, new challenges, and continued duty. During these nights, thoughts often drift. Warriors remember the agoge, the lessons of endurance and silence, the presence of the helots, the shadow of the city behind them. They think of their families, of rituals completed, of gods petitioned, and of comrades standing quietly nearby. Memory and observation intertwine, creating a soft, reflective space that allows both rest and awareness to coexist. The march also teaches humility. The world beyond Sparta is vast, and the soldiers are reminded of their smallness within it. Hills, rivers, forests all exist independently of human endeavor, following their own rhythms. The Spartan learns to move in harmony with these forces, to respect them, to understand the limits of control. This awareness fosters patience, observation, and the deep calm that marks all their disciplined actions. Through days and nights, through sun and shadow, the Spartan march continues. It is never frantic, never hurried. Every step is deliberate, every movement a meditation. The journey to war is as much internal as it is external, a slow unfolding of awareness, a constant rehearsal of patience, endurance, and readiness. By the time the army approaches the outskirts of a battlefield, every soldier has already practiced discipline for countless hours through both training and the long, quiet march. And so, as the dawn rises over distant hills and the march continues toward the unknown, one senses a profound calm underlying the visible motion. These warriors are not hurried. They are steady, measured, and attentive. They are guided by habit, by training, and by a quiet respect for the forces around them. Each mile walked, each footfall upon the soil, is part of the rhythm that sustains them, shapes them, and prepares them for the inevitable convergence of life, duty, and death. In this way, the Spartan march is not merely a movement through space, but a meditation in motion. It binds the body, mind, and spirit together, reinforcing lessons of endurance, silence, vigilance, and discipline. The journey itself, though long and demanding, is a sacred practice, a continuation of all the lessons learned in the Agoj and in the shadow of the Helots. It is a living ritual, connecting soldier, city, and gods, weaving together preparation and awareness in every deliberate step. As night falls once more, the soldiers make camp again. Fires flicker against the darkness, and the soft sounds of the river or the wind through trees provide a gentle accompaniment to their quiet rest. They lie in the shelters, not in fear, but in readiness, the calm vigilance of their march extending even into sleep. Each breath, each thought, each muscle remembers the rhythm, the discipline, and the quiet sacredness of this journey. And so, the march continues, not hurried, not chaotic, but measured, mindful, and continuous. Every step is a lesson in patience and endurance, a tribute to the Spartan way, a silent prayer to the gods who watch from above. The march into war is more than a physical endeavor. It is a meditation in motion, a slow and deliberate journey that binds the soldiers to one another, to the city, and to the principles that define their lives. Part 10. Dreams of Home and Distant Sparta. As the march stretches into its quiet hours, a different kind of journey begins, not along the winding roads or through rolling hills, but within the minds of the Spartan warriors, with shields stacked and fires gently glowing. The soldiers' bodies rest while their thoughts drift slowly, like river currents under the moonlight. This is the realm of memory and imagination, where the distant city of Sparta calls softly, a place of familiar stones, sunlit hills, and the quiet rhythm of life left behind. Imagine yourself there, lying under the sparse canopy of a temporary camp, the scent of smoke from a modest fire mingling with the earthy fragrance of soil and dew. Your muscles ache, but your mind wanders freely, carried along by the gentle cadence of the day's march. The images are simple yet profound. Narrow streets where children play under the watchful eyes of mothers. Stone. Fountains that glint in the sunlight, the quiet temples where prayers rise to the gods in the stables, where horses paw softly at the ground, eager for attention. For many Spartan soldiers, these thoughts are tinged with longing. They recall the faces of siblings and friends, the warmth of a simple meal, the steady cadence of training within familiar walls. Even the hard lessons of the Agoge emerge, not as punishment, but as markers of growth, of resilience, of belonging to a city that values discipline, courage, and communal strength. Each memory is soft-edged, like light filtered through morning mist, offering comfort without stirring agitation. The march itself becomes a background to these internal journeys. Every footfall against the earth is a gentle reminder of endurance. Every subtle shift of weight on the pack or spear reinforces the physical reality of life. But it is the mind that travels now, exploring the small, intimate details of home details often overlooked in the heat of duty. The feel of sun-warmed stones under bare feet, the scent of bread baking in communal ovens, the hush of early morning prayers offered before training begins, all of these images create a quiet mosaic of home life painted in soft tones that soothe and calm. Spartan soldiers also carry the weight of duty alongside these recollections. Even in dreams, the city calls. They envision themselves walking through familiar streets, observing the patterns of civic life, ensuring the phalanx is prepared, the helots remain accounted for, and the sacred rituals proceed without interruption. This awareness, gentle and constant, reinforces a sense of responsibility without anxiety. A quiet understanding that connection to home is inseparable from the discipline that defines their existence. Sometimes the mind wanders to distant landscapes beyond Sparta itself. The soldiers imagine foreign hills, rivers, and plains where their footsteps will soon echo. They picture other cities, other armies, and the slow unfolding of events far from the familiar sunlit hills. These distant visions are not threats in these moments, but landscapes to explore gently, scenes for the imagination to roam while the body rests. Awareness remains, subtle and calm, yet it does not disturb the softness of the memory of home. Within these moments, the senses remain attuned. The rustle of leaves in the night breeze, the crackle of fire, and the distant hum of nocturnal insects become companions to reflection. The taste of dried meats from the day's ration lingers faintly on the tongue. The soft press of armor against tired muscles serves as a grounding sensation, a reminder that the body, though at rest, has participated fully in the day's discipline. Even the sounds of companions shifting in their shelters are absorbed into this meditative state, each contributing to a communal rhythm of quiet endurance. Dreams of home and distant Sparta are also shaped by ritual. Soldiers remember the quiet prayers whispered before sleep, gestures toward Artemis, Orthia, Athena, and the gods who oversee their city and their lives. These memories are gentle affirmations of connection threads, linking past lessons, present awareness, and the city that nurtured them. Rituals are not dramatic. They are steady, calm, and purposeful, anchoring the mind in a continuum of tradition and continuity. In these moments, loneliness often emerges subtly. Young warriors, trained to endure separation and hardship, acknowledge the absence of family, friends, and familiar spaces. Yet this loneliness is tempered by reflection and acceptance, not by distress. It is an awareness that sustains resilience. They learn to carry their connections internally, to draw comfort from memory, and to cultivate patience for the day when duties may conclude and home may once again be embraced. The march ahead is never far from thought, even in these quiet reflections. Soldiers imagine the gradual unfolding of terrain, the steps yet to be taken, the rivers to cross, the hills to ascend. These images are gentle forecasts, rehearsals in the mind that prepare them for the reality of the journey. The practice of envisioning these movements fosters calmness and control. It is a form of meditation intertwined with practicality. Meals from the day linger in memory. The crusty bread, the small portions of dried meat, the occasional sip of watered wine. These simple comforts, experienced amid exertion and vigilance, acquire a new richness when recalled. They represent both sustenance and ritual, providing a quiet stability that allows the mind to wander safely into memory and imagination. Even the subtle discomforts, the weight of a pack, the ache of muscles, the friction of sandals are absorbed into this meditative awareness, noted without complaint, transformed into lessons in endurance and presence. The soldier's dreams sometimes drift to the laughter of comrades, quiet conversations around fires, and the subtle bonds forged in shared hardship. Brotherhood, already central to Spartan life, is experienced here in reflective form. Memories of mutual support, of small gestures of care during long marches or strenuous drills arise gently in the mind. These moments provide solace, a quiet reminder that even in solitude or separation from home, the bonds of friendship endure. Night itself is a teacher. Stars above offer constancy, the moonlight brushing the terrain in soft silver, the gentle nocturnal sounds providing rhythm and pattern. Observing these, the mind of the soldier practices patience, attention, and acceptance. Just as the march demands steady feet and calm endurance, so too does the contemplation of home and distant lands teach measured thought and careful reflection. The same principles apply, though the pace has slowed and the landscape has shifted from physical to mental. Memory of the agoge intertwines with these reflections. Young boys recall their first lessons in patience, endurance, and quiet observation. Remember moments of hunger, the sting of minor injuries, the lessons in silence, the tests of courage at night. Each memory surfaces not as discomfort, but as a quiet triumph, a demonstration of growth. These recollections are integrated into the present meditation, creating continuity between past, present, and imagined future. The shadow of duty, too, persists. Even in reflection, the city, the helots, the balance of society, and the expectations of Sparta are never entirely absent. Soldiers imagine themselves walking through the city, overseeing training, observing the city's rhythms, and attending to sacred duties. This awareness, gentle yet constant, reinforces the importance of presence, patience, and calm vigilance. Dream and memory intertwine seamlessly with responsibility, each enriching the other without disturbing the mind's tranquility. As the night progresses, thoughts drift into quieter and softer territories. Soldiers picture themselves at the riverbanks, dipping hands into the cool water, or resting beneath familiar olive trees. They recall the warmth of sunlight, the scent of herbs, and the gentle sound of distant birdsong. Even when imagining the distant hills of foreign lands, the mind's eye softens the details, allowing landscapes to pass slowly, like clouds across a vast sky. These gentle visions cultivate serenity and mental endurance. Reflection extends to simple, everyday gestures, the folding of a tunic, the careful handling of a spear, the respectful nod to a passing comrade. In recalling these small movements, the mind practices control and attentiveness, echoing the lessons learned in both childhood and the agoge. Discipline is remembered as a comforting structure, not a rigid demand. It is a guide for action, a rhythm for thought, and a quiet companion for imagination. By the time dawn begins to brush the eastern hills, soldiers have traveled far in mind and spirit. They have revisited home, surveyed distant lands, remembered their training, and contemplated their duties. The quiet reflection nurtures resilience, patience, and calm endurance, offering a gentle preparation for the day's renewed exertions. A cycle of observation, meditation, and memory becomes part of their broader discipline, weaving together mind, body, and spirit. Even as they awaken to the new day, the impressions of dreams and reflections linger. Memory of home, the distant hills of Sparta, the faces of loved ones. The rituals of city life, all of these accompany the warriors as they stand, stretch, and continue their journey.
Ow.
The comfort of remembered places, of familiar routines, and of gentle reflection provides a foundation upon which the next phase of discipline, endurance, and vigilance will rest. In this way, the dreams of home and distant Sparta are more than nostalgia. They are a practice in serenity, a meditation on continuity, a soft reinforcement of the values and skills that sustain the Spartan soldier. Every reflection, every imagined hill, every recalled face, and every remembered ritual strengthens the mind, sharpens the awareness, and maintains the rhythm of life that will continue into the march, the training, and the battlefield. And so, as the first light spills across the landscape and the soldiers rise to resume the day's journey, the gentle impressions of night remain. The mind has traveled, rested, and prepared, ready to move with the same deliberate rhythm, awareness, and calm that define the Spartan way. Reflection and preparation, memory and meditation, They are all companions on this ongoing path, connecting the soldier to home, to the city, to the enduring principles that shape every step, every breath, and every moment of life along the Spartan road. Part 11. The Weight of Duty. The morning light stretches slowly across the hills, touching the columns of the phalanx as the Spartan soldiers prepare once again to step into the rhythm of the day. Duty, silent and constant, rests upon them like the weight of their shields, felt but not fully spoken. It is a presence that has accompanied them from their earliest lessons in the agoge, woven into every memory of hunger, endurance, and careful observation. Today, like every day, it is both invisible and essential, a steady companion, guiding each movement, each breath, and each thought. Imagine yourself among them, walking silently behind the lined ranks, observing as the soldiers tighten straps, adjust spears, and exchange measured nods with their companions. There is no fanfare, no rush. Each motion is deliberate, slow, and imbued with purpose. Even in these quiet moments, duty asserts itself not as a demand, but as a gentle insistence, reminding the warriors that their bodies, minds, and spirits are instruments in service of a larger order. The weight of duty is multifaceted. It is responsibility to one's city, to the polis that nurtured and trained them. It is vigilance over the helots whose labor sustains the Spartan way of life. It is fidelity to comrades, to the men who share every hardship, every march, every battle. It is also the unseen responsibility to the past, the memory of ancestors, the examples set by those who came before, and the legacy that will follow. Each soldier carries this weight silently, integrating it into every step and breath. As the soldiers begin their daily routines, one can notice how duty permeates even the smallest actions. The cleaning and maintenance of armor, the careful inspection of weapons, the alignment of formations, all are acts of responsibility.
Ice.
Each movement, while simple, is reinforced by awareness. The awareness that any lapse, however minor, has consequences, not only for the individual, but for the cohesion of the unit. Yet this awareness does not create anxiety. It cultivates a calm attentiveness, a meditative focus on the present. Imagine, for a moment, the internal life of a young warrior as he straps his shield. He remembers the lessons from the agoge, to endure discomfort, to move with deliberate care, to cultivate both patience and vigilance. He recalls the countless hours of training, the whispered instructions of mentors, the encouragement and silent companionship of peers. In these recollections, duty is not a burden, it is a framework that guides him through both exertion and reflection. The phalanx moves slowly across open fields, the rhythm of their steps measured and deliberate. Each footfall on the soft earth is a reminder of continuity, of order, of the responsibility shared among all. The air carries the scent of the land, dry grass, soil warmed by the sun, the distant temps of water from a stream. Each sensory detail is absorbed quietly, grounding the soldiers as they maintain alignment, posture, and readiness. Duty, in this sense, is both internal and externally manifest in mindfulness, observation, and careful participation in the world. Meals consumed during brief halts are understated and functional, yet even these are acts of duty. Bread, dried meat, and small sips of wine are shared with comrades in silence, each portion rationed with care. Eating is no mere indulgence. It is preparation, a ritual of sustenance that reinforces both individual endurance and collective strength. The quiet chewing, the occasional glance toward a companion, and the soft gestures of passing water or bread all reinforce bonds and maintain the measured rhythm that duty demands. As the day progresses, soldiers engage in exercises that echo the phalanx drills of their youth. Spear thrusts, shield alignment, and synchronized movement are practiced slowly, repetitively, and attentively. Here, duty manifests as continuity, the preservation of knowledge, technique, and discipline, passed silently from one generation to the next. These exercises are not performed with speed or drama. They are steady, deliberate, and meditative, ensuring that every soldier internalizes the principles that sustain the unit. Beyond the physical tasks, the soldiers maintain an internal dialogue, a quiet reflection on the responsibilities that accompany every action. They consider the well-being of comrades, the integrity of the phalanx, and the security of the city. They recall lessons from elders, the wisdom of ancestors, and the unspoken expectations of Sparta itself. Duty is never discussed in grandeur. It is acknowledged through action, observation, and steady attention to the smallest details. The sun climbs higher, casting long shadows that shift slowly across the land. The soldiers pause at intervals to drink from streams, adjust equipment, or rest briefly in the shade of a hill. Even these pauses are suffused with mindfulness. Every sip of water, every stretch of tired muscles, is an act of careful awareness, a recognition of the body's needs, and a measured response. In these moments, duty is integrated seamlessly into the fabric of daily life, neither imposed nor resisted, but lived quietly and attentively. Evening approaches with a gentle softness. Fires are lit at the edge of the camp, the smoke curling upward in lazy spirals. The soldiers settle around them, sharing warmth and silence, their eyes attuned to both the familiar and the distant. Observe subtle movements in the surrounding land, the shift of a breeze through grass, the flutter of a bird returning to its roost, the distant murmur of water. All of these observations feed the internal sense of responsibility, the ongoing awareness that life is sustained, not only through action but also through perception. During these hours, the weight of duty is most palpable in reflection. Soldiers consider the city they protect, the obligations they carry, and the ideals they embody. Each thought is gentle, contemplative, never urgent, allowing the mind to explore responsibility without agitation. They recall the faces of family, the lessons of mentors, and the silent sacrifices of those who maintain the polis in their absence. Reflection becomes a bridge between personal endurance and civic obligation, between private memory and public responsibility. The night deepens, and the soldiers retire to modest shelters, lying with armor set aside, but consciousness still active. Dreams emerge slowly, merging memory, hope, and quiet contemplation. Duty remains present, a soft companion in both sleep and wakefulness, reminding each warrior of continuity, of integrity, and of the interconnectedness of all their actions. Even in repose, the principles of vigilance, resilience, and attentiveness are quietly reinforced. As hours pass, attention drifts gently to the landscape beyond the camp. The hills are softened by moonlight, the streams glimmer faintly, and the distant outline of Sparta seems near and far at once. Soldiers contemplate the balance between the world they traverse and the world they protect, recognizing that each step, each observation, and each measured action is a continuation of a long tradition. The weight of duty, though present, is now integrated with calm awareness, patience, and a quiet appreciation for the rhythm of life. This evening reflection also emphasizes the bonds of brotherhood. Each soldier is part of a living network of responsibility, connected through shared labor, shared hardship, and shared vigilance. They sense the lives of others, intertwined with their own, each action reinforcing the safety, stability, and harmony of the group. The silent mutual understanding of these connections becomes both comfort and guidance, reinforcing the ongoing journey and the steady march of life along Spartan principles. Throughout these long hours, the soldier's consciousness cycles between observation, memory, and reflection. The principles of duty discipline, attentiveness, endurance, and loyalty are reinforced not through dramatic instruction but through slow, deliberate engagement with each moment. Even small, subtle axis shift of a shield, a glance toward a comrade, the careful passage over uneven terrain become exercises in responsibility, attention, and care. Duty in this context is not weighty or oppressive. It is an ever-present, gentle force, guiding thought, movement, and reflection. And so, as the night stretches further, the soldiers lie quietly, each immersed in their internal landscape of memory, contemplation, and awareness. The firelight flickers softly, casting shadows that move like slow dancers across the camp. The distant hills stand serene, and the cool night air carries the scent of earth, grass, and faint smoke. Every sound, every sensation, every memory contributes to a subtle meditation on life, obligation, and resilience. By the time the first hints of dawn appear, the soldiers have traversed vast terrain within their minds. They have considered home, comrades, city, and gods, integrating all reflections into a coherent awareness of responsibility. The weight of duty, once external and abstract, is now internalized as a calm rhythm that shapes both thought and action. It is carried softly, like the gentle pressure of a shield on the shoulder, present yet unobtrusive, guiding every step of the day ahead. Thus, the day begins anew, with soldiers rising to meet the demands of both the body and the mind, carrying duty as a companion, a teacher, and a steady, meditative force. The lessons of endurance, discipline, and reflection learned in the agoj, reinforced by long years of shared hardship and silent vigilance, continue seamlessly in every movement, thought, and quiet observation. In the calm rhythm of preparation, movement, and reflection, the Spartan soldier embodies the quiet power of responsibility, awareness, and unwavering dedication to the city. The comrades and the enduring code that defines a life of measured, disciplined duty. Part 12. Reflections at the Edge of Empire. The day wanes gently, the sun dipping low over distant hills, casting long, soft shadows across the rolling terrain.
Ice.
The Spartan warriors, having endured another day of exertion, discipline, and vigilance, paused to take in the quiet of the land around them. Here at the edge of empire, life is measured not by the grandeur of cities or the splendor of marble temples, but by rhythm, reflection, and the subtle interplay of duty, endurance, and quiet observation. Imagine yourself among them, seated on a smooth stone or resting against a weathered tree trunk, feeling the sun's final warmth fading into the cooling evening. The air carries the faint scent of grass, earth, and distant smoke from campfires, blending with the subtle saltiness of perspiration from a day spent marching, training, and standing in silent readiness. Every sensation is heightened in stillness, each detail an anchor for contemplation and calm. The edge of empire is a liminal space, a threshold between the ordered world of Sparta and the untamed lands beyond. Soldiers sense the vastness of what lies ahead, the unknown stretches that demand attention, endurance, and courage. Yet here at this quiet hour, the vastness is neither threatening nor oppressive. It becomes a mirror reflecting the discipline, resilience, and inner strength cultivated over years of training and shared hardship. The landscape is both a teacher and companion. Gentle hills, sparse trees, and distant watercourses are observed with the calm attentiveness of those trained to notice both the subtle and the significant. Every rustle of leaves, distant bird call, and shifting shadow becomes part of a living rhythm, a subtle cue that reinforces awareness and mindfulness. In this calm observation, duty, reflection, and the continuity of the Spartan way are quietly reinforced. Soldiers contemplate the life they have lived and the lessons carried forward from childhood in the agoj, the endurance of hunger, the practice of silence, the cultivation of strength, the reliance on comrades, and the disciplined movement that forms the phalanx. Each recollection unfolds gently in the mind, like a slow river tracing familiar channels through memory. Here, in the quiet edge of empire, the lessons are not abstract, they are lived. They're embodied in posture, thought, and the rhythm of breath. There is also a sense of connection across time. Warriors remember the generations of Spartans before them, whose footsteps have worn paths across hills and plains, whose discipline and courage have shaped the city, and whose silent vigilance has preserved the polis. In reflecting on these ancestors, the soldiers sense continuity, a chain of life and responsibility stretching backward and forward, grounding them in purpose and belonging. The weight of duty, once experienced as external and demanding, now becomes a comforting structure, a subtle guide in both thought and action. Even as they rest, the warriors observe one another. Brotherhood forged over countless days and nights of shared exertion remains a quiet, constant presence. The simple nods, brief glances, and subtle gestures of care and attention convey unspoken understanding. Each member of the phalanx is attuned to the well-being of the others, aware that the strength of the whole depends upon the attentiveness and endurance of each individual. This understanding is absorbed slowly, silently, like the fading light of evening washing over the hills. Thoughts inevitably drift to the city of Sparta itself, distant yet ever present in the soldier's consciousness. They imagine the familiar stone streets, the echo of voices in the training yards, the rhythmic chants of instruction, and the comforting routines of home life. Even the harsh lessons, once met with struggle, are recalled now as quiet affirmations of growth and resilience. In these reflections, home is not merely a physical space, it is a repository of memory, discipline, and gentle reassurance. The Edge of Empire also inspires reflection on mortality. Soldiers consider the fragility of life and the inevitability of death, not with fear, but with calm acceptance. The lessons of sacrifice and courage are interwoven with contemplation, shaping an understanding that each day of discipline, each moment of vigilance, and each act of endurance contributes to a larger whole. Death is acknowledged as part of life's natural rhythm, a quiet constant that reinforces the value of every deliberate step, every measured action, and every silent observation. As the light fades, stars begin to emerge, scattered across the sky like distant fires. The constellations are familiar guides, marking the passage of time and the continuity of the cosmos. Soldiers reflect on the movement of the heavens above, aligning their thoughts with the steady rhythms observed in both sky and earth. The slow rotation of stars mirrors the disciplined, measured movements of the phalanx, the cadence of marches, and the repetition of rituals. In these observations, the universe itself seems to mirror the principles cultivated within the Spartan way: order, balance, endurance, and calm attentiveness. Fires burn low, their glow soft and steady, illuminating the faces of comrades and the surrounding terrain in gentle shifting light. Shadows lengthen and merge, creating a landscape of subtle contrasts. Soldiers watch these patterns with quiet focus, noting each movement without urgency. Even in the simplicity of observation, the lessons of discipline, patience, and presence are reinforced. Echoing the training that has defined their lives, reflection now turns inward, to the mind and spirit. Soldiers consider the totality of their experience: childhood lessons, hours of training, endurance of hunger, practice of silence, and the quiet satisfaction of a well-formed phalanx. Each element is examined with gentle attention, each insight absorbed slowly and deliberately. The weight of duty, the bonds of brotherhood, and the rhythm of daily life are all integrated into a calm, coherent awareness that nourishes both mind and soul. The Edge of Empire, though distant from home, is suffused with the presence of the city, the continuity of culture, and the principles that define Spartan life. Soldiers sense that their efforts, small and measured though they may be, contribute to something enduring and larger than themselves: the vast lands beyond, the challenges encountered, and the unknown future are all approached with quiet vigilance and calm acceptance. This reflection provides both grounding and comfort, a sense of participation in a chain of responsibility that stretches across generations. Evening deepens into night. The temperature drops, bringing a crispness to the air. Soldiers wrap themselves in simple cloaks, sit near low fires, or recline on the earth. The faint murmurs of conversation are subdued, a quiet exchange of thought and observation rather than boisterous speech. These moments of calm companionship reinforce both camaraderie and mindfulness. Each breath, each glance, each subtle movement is a continuation of the slow, deliberate rhythm that defines life at the edge of empire. Thoughts drift to the distant hills of home, the city of Sparta, and the familiar landmarks that anchor memory. Soldiers recall rituals of prayer, offerings to gods, and quiet reflections on the values instilled through years of training. These memories are neither urgent nor distracting. They provide a soft, steady connection to past and present, a gentle reassurance that amidst the unknown and the challenges of duty, the principles of life and discipline remain intact. Silence becomes almost complete, broken only by natural sounds, the whisper of wind through trees, soft murmur of distant streams, the occasional call of a nocturnal bird. Soldiers absorb these sounds, allowing them to reinforce attention, patience, and presence. The environment itself becomes a teacher, guiding awareness and fostering calm observation. In this quiet attentiveness, the weight of empire feels less daunting, more like a gentle context for reflection and steady endurance. The night deepens further. Stars, now fully visible, stretch across the sky in broad constellations. Soldiers contemplate their position in the world, the connections between Earth and cosmos, the delicate balance of duty and reflection, and the integration of body, mind, and spirit. Each thought, each observation, each memory reinforces the principles of Spartan life, cultivating calmness, resilience, and measured awareness. As the final hours of night approach, the soldiers prepare for the first movements of dawn. Equipment is checked with care, bodies are adjusted, and minds are aligned with the rhythm of the day. The weight of duty, once heavy in expectation, is now a companion of calm focus and reflective awareness. The lessons of endurance, brotherhood, discipline, and ritual have been absorbed into consciousness, providing guidance and reassurance as the first light spills across the horizon. And so at the edge of empire, the Spartan warriors rest, reflect, and prepare. The day, the march, the training, and the quiet observations converge into a continuous rhythm of life. Every moment, every breath, every glance, every movement has been integrated into a coherent whole, a life of measured attention, discipline, endurance, and reflection. As the first sun rays touch the hills and the soldiers rise once more, the principles that have guided them, memory, duty, brotherhood, vigilance, and reflection, remain with them. Life continues in rhythm, yet each moment carries the gentle imprint of all that has been experienced. Here at the edge of empire, the Spartan warrior finds both purpose and serenity. A soft harmony of mind, body, and spirit, prepared for whatever the next day may bring. The vast lands beyond the distant city, and the countless moments of lived experience converge into a quiet understanding that discipline, reflection, and measured awareness are not only the tools of survival, but the means by which life is experienced fully, deeply, and with calm presence. And with this realization, the soldiers rest, knowing that the lessons of the past, the demands of the present, and the promise of the future are all gently held within the rhythm of their lives.